Good evening. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the city of Washington, D.C. I chose D.C. because I was born there and much of my family still lives there. I'm going to be going over some of the attractions there and their historic value. Unfortunately, there's too many of those attractions for me to touch base on all of them right now. So I'm going to do my best and hit the ones that I think are the most important and the ones that mean a lot to me. The White House is the center of our nation's government. Arlington National Cemetery is the reminder of the high price of freedom, and the monuments along the National Mall illustrate the history of our nation. Back in the late 1700s, when D.C. was still being planned out and developed, there was a contest held to determine who would be the architect of the president's new house. There were only 9 submissions, and the winner was an Irish-born man by the name of James Houghton. He began construction in 1792. They called in stonemasons from Scotland, but most of the supplies were from much closer, mainly Virginia and North Carolina. The bricks were actually fashioned in the front lawn. The White House was not finished until 1800, and when I say finished, I mean it wasn't lived in. Unfortunately, George Washington never got to live there himself because his presidency was over before the necessary rooms of the White House were finished. John Adams, our second president, and his wife were the first people to live there. And as I said, even then, many of the rooms were not finished and there was still ongoing construction for a long time. The White House has been through all sorts of physical changes over the years. It survived 2 fires, one of which was started by the British in the War of 1812, as well as it survived all sorts of customization from the presidents living there. The White House is the only private residence belonging to a head of state that is open and available for the public to visit free of charge. I think that's really cool. The Arlington National Cemetery obviously was not always a cemetery. Before that, it belonged to a man named Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was a graduate from West Point who served the nation before the Civil War. He was well liked, and he always did well in every job that was given to him. The Union troops wanted him to command their forces in the Civil War. He, however, declined because his loyalties laid with his home state of Virginia and the Confederates. The Civil War was not good for Lee. Obviously, we know he lost, but also his home was captured by the Union troops and was actually turned into a headquarters. Robert E. Lee's estate was massive. There was all sorts of land. As the death toll added up for the Union troops in the war, there was no spot for them to bury the dead bodies. Somebody suggested they use Lee's estate. The idea stuck, and that's what they used. The cemetery has served as a resting place for many of our nation's fallen soldiers over the years. It's now open every day of the year, 365 days, and it is home to over 100 burials a week. The Arlington National Cemetery also houses one of the cooler things, I think, in Washington, D.C., which is the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It represents all of our soldiers who have been missing in action and never found, or who have died and whose remains have not been able to be identified. Of course, when you're talking about Washington, D.C., you can't forget about the monuments along the National Mall. These have to be some of the most popular tourist attractions in the area. One of the most widely recognized, and definitely the most visible, is the Washington Monument, an obelisk that stands 555 feet tall in honor of George Washington's military achievements. There's also the Vietnam War Memorial, which is a long wall of marble on which are inscribed the names of every casualty of the Vietnam War. There's also the Lincoln Memorial, which is a Greco-inspired temple in which you would find a 19-foot tall statue of our President Abraham Lincoln. This is just a taste of some of the statues and monuments on the National Mall. In conclusion, Washington, D.C. is an incredible city with a nation's worth of history. You can find the nation's most prestigious and beautiful cemetery there, and there are many monuments which have been constructed to honor the memories of those who helped build our great nation, both on the battlefield and in government.